Hello and welcome to the very first Root2Res podcast episode. My name is Laura Kemper and I'm excited to talk today to the Root2Res project coordinators and find out more about the project. First, a quick introduction to the project. As we all know, agricultural systems are facing more and more constraints due to climate change. So it's really important to identify and develop new crop cultivars that are able to make production more resilient. In this context, root systems play a major role. The research project, Root to Resilience, or Root2Res for short, aims to develop phenotyping, genetic, and modeling tools and use them to define and test innovative genotype idiotypes that are able to withstand changes in the climate. To discuss this, I'm joined today by the project coordinators Jean-Pierre Cohan from Arvalis in France and Tim.George from the Hutton Institute in Scotland. So thank you both for joining me today. Maybe we can start with a quick introduction. Jean-Pierre, would you like to start?
Okay, so my name is Jean-Pierre Cohan from Arvalis in France. So Arvalis is a French applied research institute based in France and mainly funded by farmers. And at Arvalis, I am the manager of a research department focusing on crop physiology, genetics, and crop phenotyping with remote sensing and proximal sensors.
Yeah, so I'm Tim George. I'm from the Hutton Institute in Scotland, in the UK. And we're an organisation that works on how agriculture fits into the environment. And we do fundamental through to applied research. My particular interests are in how plants interact with soils and how roots impact that environmental interaction. I'm a rhizosphere scientist, and I've been recently appointed as the deputy director of something known as the International Barley Hub, which is all about trying to improve the interactions between scientists and stakeholders in the barley value chain.
Great, thanks. Maybe you can start by explaining what the main goals of the project are.
The most important goals of the Root2Res project is, first of all, to provide operational tools and knowledge to our targets, I mean breeders and agronomists, to better use and integrate root traits in their activities, breeding, research and development program, etc., etc. The final objective is to provide some information and tools to help them to enhance more resilient crops to abiotic stresses for more resilient rotational crop system. And in the global context of climate change and the increasing pressure of abiotic stress on crop and crop production system.
And can you tell us what you mean by abiotic stresses?
We are addressing non-living stresses like water stress. In water stress, we mean at the same time drought, of course, but also excess of water during winter, and also nutrient stress. I mean nutrient deficiencies for phosphorus, nitrogen, etc., etc.
And Tim, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the kinds of tools that the project will produce in order to reach the project's goals.
The idea of the project is to provide a range of tools. So we have a couple of toolboxes that we want to provide. One of them is a phenotyping toolbox, and the other one is a modeling toolbox. So we want to design phenotyping tools which allow us to measure root traits and rhizosphere traits under realistic conditions. So in soils, in the field, particularly. So the idea of this is that we will be able to provide a protocol and a way in which breeders, particularly breeders, but end users can use to measure their root phenotypes under realistic conditions. One of the biggest problems, which we'll go on to describe later on, is that roots are really difficult to observe and to phenotype. So we need to produce these new tools which allow us to do that effectively. As far as the modeling is concerned, we also want to provide the community with more advanced and developed models for looking at how roots interact with the environment. And this will improve knowledge and understanding of that root-soil interaction, that root-environmental interaction. The third toolbox that we're interested in providing is the genetic toolbox, which is basically pre-breeding tools for breeders. So breeders need to be able to identify a marker for a particular trait, for example, to be able to then screen for that trait in their population. So one of the outputs of this project is likely to be those breeding tools, those kind of markers which allow the breeders to then go on and very rapidly screen their material for improved breeding systems, for example.
So we've got some quite ambitious goals. But how did you come up with this idea for the project?
It has been a long story. Originally, some partners in the consortium already met in previous projects, particularly Arvalis and the Hutton Institute. And all partners already had in their research program objectives the idea to work on root traits and how to use root traits in breeding programs. So originally, two first versions of consortia emerged, one around the Hutton Institute and one around Arvalis. And at, I would say, a early stage of our reflection, we decided to merge our consortium to have just one at the end to rapidly build a consolidated group and finalize the project.
So I expect then if you were kind of joining two consortia that you had quite a lot of expertise to choose from. What did you want to find specifically in terms of partners, or what skills were you looking for?
Our first objective when searching for partners was to gather a pluridisciplinary teams mixing skills for genetics, agronomy, breeding, field and control environment, trials, facilities, etc. And it was very important for us to have all the skills needed to address such a complicated issue, because root traits are complicated to phenotype and to consider in research program like breeding program and agronomy research and development activities. So this was our first goal, to gather our partners in one group. The second thing we were looking for was to have partners able to work on fields in several agroclimatic conditions across Europe, from north to south, but also from west to east, because we know that there are strong interaction between root traits and climatic and soil condition. So it was very important for us to have partners everywhere. And that's also why we decided to also have some partners outside the boundaries of Europe by including some partners from Africa. And the last point we were looking for was to have, of course, skilled and high-ranking research and development teams in our group.
So, yeah, I think we'll get now into a little bit more about the topic itself. So roots are obviously very important to this project, but why are root traits so important? Why are we focusing so much on them?
It's a very good question. The first thing I think we must underline is that root traits are so important because they are the very basement of the access to resources for plants and particularly for crops. So roots are at the beginning of the story for nutrient uptake, for water uptake, etc., etc. So addressing root traits is crucial to improve the capacity of crop to better access and exploit the resources from the soil. And the second point I would like to underline, and I think Tim could add something about that, the specificity of our project is, of course, to address root traits, but to address root traits globally. We would like to address the traits related to the interaction between the root system and the soil microbiome, and in a concept of global rhizosphere and an extended phenotype of the root system.
So you mentioned the connection between the root system and the soil microbiome. Can you talk a bit about why we're looking at this?
It's an incredibly important aspect to the project and also to understanding how plants manipulate their environment and change the availability of resources and so on, because the microbes are critical to many of those aspects. They will change themselves in close proximity to roots, the community, the function, and so on. But they also change their environment. So the environment close to roots is very different to that away from roots, and a lot of that is down to the activity of microorganisms in that zone. And so those changes in the environment also change how the resources are made available and used by the plant. The idea of the project is to try and understand this interaction more and allow development of techniques which will allow us to phenotype that extended phenotype that Jean-Pierre described earlier. That is the interaction between the root and the microorganisms in the rhizosphere. The critical thing about this is that if we understand those interactions better, then we can apply them in the agricultural system. So we can apply that understanding of the ecology, of how these things work in natural ecosystems, for example, into an agricultural setting, and replace some of the more industrial agricultural approaches, I guess.
And can you explain why this is important for the bigger picture?
I mean, I would go as far as to say that the root-soil interface, and I might be prejudiced here, but is the most important interface on the planet right now, because this is where all of the activity is, where we can control things like greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural systems, or where we can understand how plants will interact with environments which are changed by climate change, for example, or where we can influence the resource capture by plants, which is the primary source of the building blocks for primary production on a global scale. Without understanding this interface, we can't sustain, or we can't sustainably manage primary production for the planet, essentially. And obviously we have, as a society, we have these huge goals or these huge challenges to face, such as feeding an increasing population with fewer resources and less environmental impact. And one of the places where we can really make a difference is at this interface between roots and soils, and roots are critical for that. So I think it's a commonly overlooked but incredibly important aspect of biology, essentially.
So sort of overshadowed by the above ground part of the crop system.
Yeah, and it comes back to the fact that people can't see them, right? So if you can't see something, you don't understand it. You don't even realize it's there. And that's one of the problems we have with roots, is they're very difficult to observe.
And just to add something, but I fully agree with Tim, of course, the fact that scientists, agronomists, breeders didn't consider root traits was mainly due to the lack of operational tools to do it. Because every agronomist and breeders know that root traits are very important, but to go deeper in this issue imply to have useful and operational tools to study root system, and that was the problem, and it's one of the main issue that we would like to address in our project.
So would you say that these kinds of tools and technology have been a major bottleneck for breeding up to this point?
Yes, this is one of the main bottlenecks to consider root traits in breeding program. Briefly, I'm an agronomist, I'm not a breeder, but as far as I know, when you want to launch a breeding program, you need to test a lot of genotypes at the same time, the same location or in different location, but you manipulate a lot of genotype in the same trials. And you can do something in controlled condition, of course. Some steps of a breeding program could use some trials in controlled condition. But at the end, you have to test a lot of genotypes in the field, in real condition. And to consider a trait in the breeding program, you need to be able to phenotype the traits efficiently for a large number of genotypes in the same field trials. And these last 10 years, we have seen a lot of progress to do it for above ground traits, with high throughput phenotyping tools, but we didn't see the same progress for root system because it's more complicated, it's in the soil, and the technology able to high throughput phenotype the root system don't exist yet. So yes, this is a technological bottleneck. One of the main objectives of the project is to provide some efficient and operational phenotyping tools for field trials, studying more than 200 or 300 genotypes to help breeders to consider root traits. But it's a big challenge.
So, I mean, I would say that we're also going through a revolution in breeding at the moment, in the sense that we're moving from a model where we're breeding for yield to breeding for improved production under reduced inputs, for example, or with environmental stress, or under non-optimal conditions. Whereas I think in the past, until recently, we've been breeding for yield under optimal conditions, and we realized that we can't maintain those optimal conditions much longer. So that revolution in breeding provides a new set of bottlenecks to the process, and one of those is, as Jean-Pierre has just described, it's the fact that we now really need to understand what the variation is underground, and the tools just aren't there to be able to do that in a high throughput way. And we're hopeful that this project will deliver some of those tools which will allow that throughput and to reduce that bottleneck, and hopefully that bottleneck will disappear in the future. And I think as people start to appreciate that, if you see a plant in the environment, then you have to realize that actually there's as much biomass below ground as there is above ground. So if people start thinking in that way, then they'll realize how important the understanding the roots and phenotyping the roots are for dealing with these new and emerging bottlenecks in the system.
Mm-hmm. And how does this relate to the genetic toolbox you mentioned earlier?
When we want to help breeders, we also have to connect traits, I mean phenotyping data, with genetic data. And this is also one of the main aspects of our project. Inside the set of toolboxes we would like to provide, there will be a genetic toolbox that will provide a lot of genetic information, mixing molecular markers, genetic resources, but also some genomic prediction models, able to help breeders to really implement root traits in their breeding program. But to define and to calibrate all this genetic information, we definitely need to have a large amount of root phenotypes data to elaborate, for example, molecular markers linked to traits, etc., etc. So this is very important to understand that we built the project as a global project, addressing at the same time the bottleneck of phenotyping, the need to have comprehensive genetic data to consider root traits, with the help of a lot of additional knowledge and tools like models, crop models, particularly to help us to consider all the agroclimatic situation we would like to address.
Mm-hmm. We've touched on this to some extent, but the project often mentions nature-based solutions. Can you talk a bit about what this means and why it's important?
I think that society can no longer just keep adding industry-produced inputs to agriculture and expect it to be sustainable. So we need to learn from ecology and natural ecosystems to be able to improve the availability of nutrients and resources in a more sustainable way, so that we can produce enough food for an increasing population with reduced environmental impact. So it's basically about trying to use ecology or understanding of agroecological principles to replace some of the external industry-produced inputs.
Yes, I agree. If we consider that a nature-based solution is a solution to improve something in a cropping system without using additional inputs from the industry, indeed we could say that the result produced by our project could be in this category, because we would like to promote some functions of the root system to improve nutrient uptake and water uptake by root system, and to also improve the carbon release in the soil to better store carbon from the atmosphere, etc. So yes, I agree. In this sense, we could say that our project will produce nature-based solution.
So finally, I wanted to ask you, in addition to the toolboxes you mentioned earlier, what do you hope to achieve with this project?
So, I mean, I would say that one of the things that would be a really great outcome of the project is that there's recognition by the wider community, by the stakeholders, by scientists as well, that the roots are really critical to solve some of these really pressing global challenges that we have right now: adaptation to climate change, agricultural sustainability, food security, etc. These are all things that roots are critical. The recognition that that is the case would be really useful. So a great outcome would be increasing the profile of this area globally. And the fact that we can, as you say, we can produce some tools which will help society tackle these problems by allowing the breeding of varieties of crops which can better cope with environmental stress or can use resources more efficiently.
The toolboxes are I would not say the only deliverables, because we would like to produce a lot of things. But the most important thing with the toolboxes is that we would like to make toolboxes that are at the same time usable, useful, that their content will be very relevant for the breeders and agronomists, etc. And at the end, we would like that our toolboxes are used, that our final users, breeders, agronomists, take this toolbox and use them in their research program. So these three words, usable, useful, and used, are very important for us, because we would like to produce something really operational and usable for everyone.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre and Tim, for this introduction to the project, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you want to find out more about the Root2Res project, visit our website, root2res.eu. That's root, R-O-O-T, and then the number 2, res, R-E-S.eu. You can find the link and more information about the project in the show notes. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will dive more into the concepts of idiotypes and plasticity and how we're working with them in the project. This episode is brought to you by the Root to Resilience project, which is supported by the European Union's Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Programme, by Innovate UK through the Horizon Europe Guarantee Scheme, and the Swiss State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation.